Welcome to the Focus and Chill podcast, where we discuss productivity tactics that work for neurodivergent individuals.
Every episode, we interview guests with lived experience of neurodiversity who also have a solid productivity and habit game, and pass the learnings on to you, our wise and benevolent audience.
We're your hosts, Jeremy and Joey.
I'm Joey, and I coach creatives to get moving on their most ambitious projects through the power of solid habits and strong focus. I'm also a perpetual student of psychology and perpetually on a quest to a one-armed chin-up.
And I'm Jeremy, a neurospicy software developer turned startup founder, building the Focus Bear app to help people with ADHD and autism thrive at work. My cool party trick is leaving parties early so I can get to sleep in time for my 2-hour-long morning routine. The Focus and Chill podcast is brought to you by Focus Bear, a habit and productivity app that makes healthy habits and deep work the path of least resistance. If you have a tendency to check emails or scroll through Instagram first thing in the morning, but long to develop a meditation and exercise habit first thing, Focus Bear can help you. The app blocks distractions on all your devices and guides you through your habits one at a time. Throughout the day, Focus Bear assists you to stay in deep work by blocking websites and apps that are unrelated to your chosen focus mode. Life's not all about work though. You'll be prompted to take regular breaks to rest your eyes and stretch your muscles. At the end of the day, Focus Bear helps you switch off. Work-related apps get hidden so you can unwind and sleep well. Check out. Welcome to episode number 57 of the Focus and Chill podcast. Our guest today is Chris Cameron. Chris is a workflow engineering and process automation expert with over a decade of experience. He founded Satellite, a company dedicated to helping small businesses optimize their operations. He also teaches people with executive function barriers how to overcome them using AI, no-code automation tools, and productivity strategies. So we'll kick things off by asking you about your experience with neurodivergence. When did you realize that you weren't neurotypical?
Sometime during the pandemic, I think like many folks, there was a good stretch at the beginning of it. I just felt really on top of a lot of things that I saw other people around me struggling with. And I said, oh, that's weird. Of course, at some point that fell apart because that was just me responding well to a situation full of chaos. And you can only keep that up for so long. That paired with having a child, becoming a parent, kind of prompted me to investigate further. I think I'd already suspected for quite some time. I didn't know really what it was. I think like a lot of people that aren't diagnosed early on, I was just like, oh, I guess I'm just weird.
Quirky.
So, yeah, that's pretty much it.
If you look back, were there signs that you can retrospectively see that might have indicated ADHD, say in your childhood and your early adulthood?
Oh, sure. I mean, I should have easily been spotted in school because I was the kid that showed up and didn't study for stuff and did really well on tests, but never handed in homework. So, all my teachers were super annoyed. Like, why don't you just do the work? You know what you need to do. And, looking back, I can see that kind of comment on many report cards. So I don't know how things fall through the cracks like that, but that's one of the things that kind of prompted me to start, getting out in the public about my neurodivergence and wanting to talk more about it was to help other people see what that looks like. And I think, the fact that we have these stereotypes of what ADHD looks like, they don't apply to everyone. So I think by discussing it more, giving more people information about it, and, hopefully people won't be my age when they're finding out.
Yeah. In terms of stereotypes, do you mean the hyperactive boy stereotype?
That's exactly what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was not like that either, but probably similar to you with not always being great at handing in homework on time. Because you were saying that initially during the pandemic, you were coping better than other people. Do you think part of it was that you actually developed a bunch of coping strategies and maybe that's why it wasn't picked up earlier as well?
I think that's part of it. I think also, I guess maybe I've adapted to just work better under pressure and in stressful environments because of my executive function issues where I'm late to start things. Not as much now because I know about it and I know how to approach that a little more effectively. But I think for so long in my life, I was just kind of doing things last minute. that it just kind of felt very natural to, to deal with these intense situations. And yeah, just a lot of stress in the pandemic. I think a lot of neurotypical people, again, not to generalize, but a lot of neurotypical people kind of, immediately had this kind of dread of the situation, where I've spoken to a lot of neurodivergent folks that kind of fared the same way I did, where they did fairly okay early on and then also kind of hit a wall at some point. So, but I think, you can only keep up that intensity or that energy of managing stress, like high levels of stress, for so long.
Yeah, I loved the pandemic period mainly because it gave me an excuse to work from home and let me change the way that I was working. It was a bit of a stressful time as well. What are the main challenges that you have faced and potentially still face today in terms of your neurodivergence?
I think I'm learning new things all the time. It's officially, my diagnosis is going to be like 2 years ago in about 3 months. So, it's not a super long time, right? I mean, I'm still
Mm,
learning a lot about different ways that I can approach things and manage stuff in my life, kind of in a like as a supplement, though, to the coping strategies that I kind of discovered on my own that are helpful. Because, of course, there were other coping strategies that are not so helpful. Uh, but I think, the ones that were, I've kept, and those include things like calendaring, taking lots of notes, setting timers. I think those are healthy, productive coping strategies that I just kind of stumbled upon accidentally, I guess, not really, from the mindset of someone diagnosed with ADHD. But I think post-diagnosis, then I started doing a lot of research and reading and speaking to other people, and just kind of picking up on these tricks that I was like, oh, okay, there are plenty of different ways to manage this. And yeah, some of those things that I was doing were like commonly recommended. So.
yeah. Yeah, in some ways, that getting things done approach from David Allen, it sort of works very well for people like me with poor working memory. Talking about calendaring and note taking, things like that, that's certainly really helpful for me as well. Because did you have issues similar to me in terms of forgetting about appointments or forgetting about tasks until the last minute? Was that part of why those tactics are helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And a big one for me is time blindness. So if
Mm,
I don't have something on my calendar, and honestly, I still have trouble really adding enough buffer time to things,
mm.
because I see it on my calendar and I realize that, there's like 2 hours before that thing. Sure, I have time to reorganize all the furniture, right? But no, I mean, jokes aside, like I definitely do run into issues where I think I can fit more into a block of time than I actually can. But I try and go back and reevaluate after the fact. And I've been journaling a lot for the past couple of years too. I find that that's a really good strategy for me to do more self-analysis and just dive into those things that, have been problems. So things like that, time blindness, I'll make a little note and say, yeah, next time don't do this thing quite the same way. And you might want to think about giving yourself, some additional cues for when you have to do this thing.
Yeah. You
So,
mentioned how you coped better than other people during the pandemic, which leads into how you perform better than other people in general, because often neurodivergent people have spiky skill sets where maybe we're worse in some areas, but you're probably much better at process automation than most people. Are there some underlying trends that you've seen if you look back at your history where your brain has allowed you to perform really well in certain areas?
yeah, I think in some ways, I don't know. This one's a really tough one. I can't explain it, but in some capacities, like a higher tolerance for frustration, and at other times, a lower tolerance for frustration. So I think it depends what the cause of the frustration is. I think things that are repetitive tasks are things that I have a very low tolerance for frustration to, but solving more complicated, aggravating problems is something that I have a higher tolerance towards. So something that, I don't know, filling out a stack of documents, I would rather go through a complex process of coding something that's a complicated workaround than having to go through one by one and figure out, like, oh, I have to fill out each of these boxes. Okay. I can't explain that one to you, but hey, it works for me. So
Hmm. Yeah, it's a bit like that XKCD comic where he talks about the payoff of automating processes versus the time involved in building the automation. Sometimes it's really fun to automate the form filling process and maybe make a robot that can handwrite the forms for you, something like that.
Yeah, there have honestly been times when I've just kind of Rube Goldberg machined an automation just for the fun of seeing something be automated and not necessarily seeing performance gains. It's just like, oh, okay, cool, you can do that. It's a good way to learn the tools as well. So sometimes you just have to get in and play around with stuff and, not necessarily take it seriously and like track all of the was it worth the time spent on it? Because if I do that, I would just throw in the towel at some point. I mean, it's easy to hit blockers doing that kind of thing, as I'm sure you've encountered yourself in development work. So
Yeah, it's I can totally sympathize with you, Chris, in terms of wanting to like program something rather than just like grind your way through a repetitive task. Could you tell us a bit more about some of the work projects that you're concentrating on at the moment?
Sure, yeah. So just a little bit of background. A couple of years ago, I started my own consultancy doing business process automation, and I continue to do that, although I've been adding on to it little by little and building out an educational component to my work. So people can find out about it through my website, Learn with CC. So that's https://learnwith.cc. It's to educate neurodivergent individuals and people with executive dysfunction on how to use automation tools and productivity kind of tools and framework and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I'm working on these days is just building out my course material and putting more of a focus on one-on-one tutoring and just helping people walk through like individual automations that they're trying to build, as well as develop a few free tools. So at the moment, I'm working on a kind of AI-enhanced workflow analysis tool. Basically, a fancy way of saying it's a form. You fill it out, and at the end, you get some suggestions on how to improve your daily workflows.
Yeah, nice one, Chris. As an educator, this might be a little bit of a tangent, I'm not sure. But as a educator, I'd love to get your opinion a bit more about the education system and maybe not even how it interacts with people that are identify as neurodivergent, but even like how it's set up at the moment and like how the state that people might come to you and things you might have to unteach them because of the education system. Hopefully that's not too loaded a question.
No, I think, well, so far, I haven't run into too many challenges in that respect about, like, I think it's more about individual bad habits, if anything. And that's one thing that I really try and focus on too, is I think it's important that we don't try and necessarily bend people to the way tools work, but instead adapt the tools to the way people work, because we are creatures of habit, like it or not. Like, I'm not a cognitive behavior therapist or anyone doing that sort of thing. So I'm not giving people strategies to reorient the way they think about the world, but I can show you how to use tools to work with you, right? Which I think in some ways is more complicated, but in other ways it's much simpler. And the thing is, once you know the basics and you have a handle on how the tools work, if you decide to change the way you work, whether that's, habits that you're trying to form or routines that you're trying to implement in your daily life, you can bring those tools along with you. Because once you know the fundamentals behind them, you can say, oh, okay, I'm changing this thing. I'll adapt the workflows to match that. Did that answer your question, or is it kind of a roundabout answer?
No, I guess basically the takeaway is that like it's people come out of the education system and like there's no one size fits all. So you basically have to adapt to their needs, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, adapting to the needs of the individual is really, it's not something that's necessarily scalable from a business perspective, but I find in a lot of ways it's more effective. So there's trade-offs, but the thing that I'm trying to do is help individuals and not necessarily grow a massive corporation. So, it's working for me.
I remember when we were talking a few weeks ago, you were saying that you're trying to make adaptive course content that might use AI to try and change what questions they're going to be asked or what content they would be shown.
Yes.
So maybe that's part of being able to slightly scale it?
Yeah, I'm a way off from I'm a ways off from that. But yeah, I've been investigating some different tools that I can use in that. Probably the most promising for anyone that's more technical in the audience, LangChain seems pretty interesting for that. So, and if you're just curious, yeah, you can look that up. But yeah, there are all kinds of different LLMs and just AI frameworks that are popping out basically everywhere you look now. So we're spoiled for choice. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot of interesting adaptive tools coming in the near future. For me, the thing is, I'm learning a whole new skill set with this stuff, and also building the other things. So I'm not super fast with it.
That's part of the fun of it. And speaking of fun, what do you do when you're not working on these courses and consulting? What are your hobbies?
Well, things like investigating new tools, honestly, and that's my personal investigative journey and stuff. The rest of the time, I'm trying to spend with my family. I have a 2.5-year-old, so he's got lots of energy, and yeah.
It's be a handful, but also a lot of joy, I imagine, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He was up pretty early this morning, so you just have days like that. But yeah, no, it's been good.
And do you do a bit in terms of new tools? Do you do a bit with physical tools as well? It looks like you've got quite a workshop behind you.
I have a diverse collection of of careers in my history. My first field of study was audio engineering, so you can see some of the recording stuff in the background that I haven't had a lot of time to play with really for the past couple of years. But that's kind of to be expected. Then some of the other stuff in the back, I have little electronics kind of hobby station with some soldering stuff and little like Raspberry Pis and those sort of little microcomputer things. So
Nice.
anything with blinky lights. So it's fun.
Do you do some home automation work as well as process automation?
I do, yeah. Yeah, so I've got a home assistant set up. That has been fun, but also mildly infuriating. I would say probably more for my wife than for me, though.
Okay.
Because usually it's like, what happened to the light switch? Did we
Why
just
are the
not have one
curtains
anymore?
opening?
Well, I haven't tried that yet, but but yeah, definitely sometimes lights will come on and off when they're not supposed to. That's that's something you quickly learn to put physical switches and buttons in place for. Um, yeah, that's a fun little kind of additional thing to throw in there. So
Nice.
yeah.
I just want to you were mentioning calendaring before, and I was just interested if there's like any other ways that you optimize productivity during your working hours. Like, is there like unhelpful productivity advice that you feel doesn't work for you?
I think for me, one of the things that I've come to realize is that things fluctuate over time. And what works for me for a few months, I can't expect it to work forever. And I think early on in my post-diagnosis journey, I was getting frustrated by that. But I've come to realize that that's fairly normal for a lot of neurodivergent folks. And I've just kind of come to respect it and realize that that's just how my brain wants to work. And I just need to adapt my systems and behaviors based on what's working now, and not necessarily like this kind of pristine vision of the future that's it's like it's just it's not necessarily going to happen. I can try and aim for something, this good framework, but ultimately it's up to my my subconscious, I think, sometimes to make those decisions. So I think, to give you a more concrete example, time boxing was one that I tried out for a while, and I was super into it for a few weeks, and I was like, this is great. I'm doing so much stuff. Everything is fitting into my schedule. And then one day I was like, I hate this. I never want to see this again. So it's something that I just kind of, I guess, reckon with, and yeah, I feel more sane not trying to put too much pressure on myself with systems like that, and keeping things a little more open and flexible.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that goes into the theme of the adaptability that you were bringing up previously in the conversation, which, yeah, it definitely makes sense. I was wondering, Chris, like, could we double click a bit more on the time boxing thing, because selfishly, when it comes to time boxing and estimating, I often find that I'm underestimating a whole bunch of things, right? And I was just wondering, like, have you found any particular estimating methods or anything that work well for you? Maybe like you're saying, you cycle between them as well, like as like depending on how you feel. Yeah, could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that is an ongoing thing for me actually is time tracking. I kind of got into the world of time tracking when I was doing web development, like freelance web development work, and I just had to keep track of my time for client projects, and that just carried over into my personal life bit by bit. And I was starting to track more and more of like, I spent a couple hours, fixing something around the house, or I spent a half hour on the phone with a friend, and pretty soon I had this thing where, it becomes a part of just a habit to just, really quickly take down a note of, okay, I spent that much time on this thing. So I think the thing that has been helpful about that, and in particular, using some of the different tools that I've been testing over the past while, is just that you start to build up this log of where your time is going and starting to see patterns and habits emerge from that, and kind of gives you a better sense of, okay, like, grocery shopping, I might think it's going to take an hour, but really it takes like 2 hours because I've got to get there. I've got to, unpack the stuff when I get home and put it away. And, so all of these additional things that you might not think of, right? Like the more data you have to go on, the clearer that picture becomes. So yeah, it's something that has worked well for me to kind of help estimate time that I would block out. That being said, there are also those blocks where it's like, yeah, I think it's going to take that much time. I guess let's see. That's fine for personal projects, but yeah.
Is that why you hate it, or you you don't like it as much, that sometimes you'll start on something and after an hour the progress hasn't been made as much as you'd like, and tearing yourself away, the transition away from it, is that what makes it painful?
It's funny that you say that, because I've started to lean back towards it again. So for a few months there, it was really like on my ignore list, but now it's been kind of creeping back in. And I think by springtime here, I'll be back in full swing with the time boxing. I need my own like kind of farmer's almanac to predict my
Related to the moon
yeah.
cycles.
Yeah.
Do you have any theories about why the cycling might happen, in terms of tools being, or approaches being interesting for some time and then no longer being relevant? Is it about just the novelty factor, or is it that other things in your life have changed and the overall ecosystem is no longer the same as it was when you started it?
I think that's part of it. I think it's just probably, just adaptation. Sorry, the thing that
Oh yeah, tolerance
and
effect.
the reason why I was kind of lost on the word is because my alarm has gone off a couple times on my phone. I silenced my phone before we started the call, but curiously, like my alarm didn't also get muted. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. You get kind of numb to these stimuli, I guess, in a way. And alarms is a really good example, because if I don't change the sound of the alarm, I'll just kind of, if I have the same one on for like too many weeks or whatever, you just kind of get so accustomed to it that you just don't really hear it as much anymore. And I think it's the same thing with different productivity techniques and tools and things like time blocking or time boxing. I honestly, if we're being perfectly honest, I don't really know the difference between those two. So feel free to correct me if I've been using the wrong one. But yeah, I think overusing a technique is the same as overusing something like an alarm sound, and your brain just kind of says, that's just not really that interesting, or in some cases outright rejects it. I don't know. That's my personal working theory. I haven't looked into it more scientifically, but
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to it as well. I definitely become accustomed to certain techniques and then they stop being as useful. For me, probably body doubling is one that I'm really liking at the moment, but I think I'm probably going to grow out of it, because I had phases in the past where I liked it and then it stopped feeling as good.
Same.
Like you said, maybe that's okay.
Yeah, I was doing that for quite some time too. And I don't know, I had a recurring thing every week that I had time blocked off on my calendar for body doubling. And then one week I forgot and just haven't really rescheduled any since. So maybe I need to start getting back into it. Maybe we can trade spots.
Yeah. I'll try time boxing.
And Jez, you think about becoming a father, so like now you can have a kid to take care of as well.
Is that what you meant?
That wasn't part of the deal.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to take a bit of time to reaccustom to my new life. So let's take a break to give me some time to think about it.
Hi there, Focus and Chillers. Are you ready to supercharge your knowledge in the realms of creativity, tech, and psychology? Come check out my fortnightly newsletter. In each edition, you'll get quick wins and actionable takeaways that you can put into practice right away. If this sounds like you, I'd love to have you as a reader. Subscribe for your fortnightly dose of insights. The link is in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show.
Right, we're back from our break. I'm still getting used to the idea of suddenly possessing a 2.5-year-old. I think we'll leave that idea for now and instead ask you about how you manage communication with people who aren't ADHDers, because that can often be a challenge. If people's brains think a bit differently, we can make assumptions about everyone thinking the same way. Have you experienced that, and how do you deal with it?
That's a great point. I'm trying to be careful about my choice of wording. But I think neurotypical people's kind of tolerance to some ADHD specific quirks can vary from person to person. So luckily, my wife is quite tolerant and neurotypical. So generally, our communication is okay. But every now and then, I'll get a look, and then I know that I said something that just doesn't quite resonate. So I think for the most part, though, I think probably due to the late diagnosis in my case, I think that's part of the whole masking thing and just kind of developing that bilingualism in the neurotypical world.
Have you started unmasking with some people?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, I don't know if it's something that you can be fully cognizant of all the time. I think it's something where with my close friends, I have never really had any kind of filter going on, and I've just been like real Chris, and who's a completely different person from like work Chris, in my past life at least. I think now, just doing my own thing business wise, I'm trying to work more with people that I just feel comfortable around being myself with. I think that starts with conversation. If you have a good dialogue with people and there's like a clear understanding, I think that's a pretty good indicator. Yeah, I don't know if there are any like secrets to communicating. And again, maybe I'm not the right person to ask too, because maybe it's just that I'm so accustomed to it for having done it for so long that I just don't know what's what's what. I don't know. I think it's one of those things that's quite challenging to answer. And I think it's really hard to know what extent masking goes to as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
What does it extend to in your life?
Yeah, I wonder about how it might manifest in terms of communicating about time, because you talked about time blindness and time estimations. I find with my wife and I that can often be a challenge, and with colleagues too, because I can be very time optimistic and say, yeah, we'll leave at 10:30, but I haven't really thought through all the things that I have to do before we leave. So I'm trying to now actually do a lot more planning and put buffer time in there. And it's mainly because I don't care. I don't care if we're late. It doesn't really bother me, but it matters for other people. So that's one way that I have to change my communication.
I have to tell you, Jeremy, I'm gonna steal your phrasing there. Time optimistic. I love that. You're right though. Like observing how much extra time things take than we expect them to is. Yeah, I think like I was mentioning earlier about the time tracking, and I know you have that functionality built into your software too that you're developing.
yeah, for similar reasons that I want to be clear on where is my time going and also how long do things actually take.
So is that how that came about? Because you saw
Yeah, personal need.
the need to...
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Similar, I guess part of it is just having clarity on how long does it actually take me to go to dinner? Because that was one thing in my evening routine that felt like a black hole, that I walk over to my parents-in-law's place every night and I'm not really sure how long that takes. And there's a lot of fluctuations in there, but having some data that normally it takes about 2 hours all up is helpful in terms of planning. And then other things in terms of a meta view of seeing how much time am I spending on these projects that I care deeply about, or that I say that I care deeply about, but how much time have I actually been spending on it, and how can I change my schedule accordingly to make more time?
Chris, could you tell us a bit more about your morning routine? What does it look like now, and how has it evolved over time?
It's a great question. I had a very meticulously crafted morning routine for a while before becoming a parent, and it has become much more flexible. It was more challenging. I'm not going to say it's not challenging now. I would figure that probably other parents will tell you the same thing, that morning routines can be quite challenging, depending on the child. But yeah, I think at some point I had this 2-hour time block where I'd wake up and exercise a little bit, meditate, try and do all these good things. And then you can't do any of that with a kid. It's really hard to fit things in a structured way like that. They need things at the time that they need them, right? And doesn't matter what you're doing. So I think being adaptive and flexible and not setting unreasonable expectations is helpful, because, then you kind of have the sense of, okay, you know what, it's going to take however long it's going to take. Then you can do whatever it is that's urgent after that. So now my morning routine is more wake up, just rudimentary getting ready and getting my son ready, to getting him breakfast and changed and getting him to daycare. And then I get back home and start work. And I have a little bit of time set aside to do those kind of daily maintenance things that I otherwise would have done like before work time, when I wasn't a parent yet. So that's it. You adapt, right? It's all about being flexible, I think. I think the quicker you kind of just come to terms with that as a new parent, the more comfortable you get in that situation, because it's the resistance that makes it difficult in the end, right? It's trying to stick to routines that just can't work. And I think that goes back to the same thing I was saying about changing your tools and tactics and all that stuff. If you try and force it, it's just going to end up being a bad time.
Yeah. When you mentioned the maintenance tasks, are they like the exercise and meditation that you mentioned, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of those has to take a back seat depending on how much time I have. So I try and alternate. Basically, it's some form of mindfulness, whether that's writing, meditation. I guess exercise has the mindfulness aspect to it as well. Not always. Sometimes it's just getting out frustration or just getting a good stretch, but depending on the exercise. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Helpful for me to start planning mentally what my life is going to be like with a newborn if that happens. I imagine sleep is affected, would you say?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. And luckily it kind of adjusts, it doesn't last forever. The terrible sleep doesn't last forever. So, I mean, for the most part, I think it's been quite some time since our son had a really bad night. Last night, he couldn't sleep at all. So he woke up in the middle of the night, and we never do this, but he was like, I want to sleep in your bed. Yes. Okay. And, fully knowing that we're not going to sleep well, but you got to make sacrifices. He had a good night's sleep, but we both slept terribly. So, but yeah, I think the big thing there is energy management, and just knowing, when you're going to have your peak energy during the day to do whatever's most pressing and works with the type of task that you're trying to accomplish. So for me, generally, like any kind of deep work type of stuff where I really need the most focused time, usually is better in the morning. So, right after I get the morning drop off and get back to my office and have a coffee, like that's when I'll get to something like some programming tasks, and then more creative stuff later in the afternoon when I'm a little less energetic, but feeling a bit more creative. And I think just kind of being mindful of that when you're sleep deprived. from having a little one around is it carries extra weight at that point because you lose time, right? Throughout the day, you're just drained. It's time that otherwise you would have been maybe not as productive, but now you're just like zero productive. I think weighing your choices of what you decide to work on becomes more critical.
Yeah. Do you ever take naps at times like that?
Oh, I took a nap today. There was no chance that I was gonna jump on to record a podcast with you at 4 p.m. without having a little bit of a nap. I wouldn't have made it. So yeah.
Well, we're grateful for you managing your energy around this.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. We've had a couple chats before, and it's been enjoyable those couple of times. I think that, we've had a lot to talk about, so appreciate you inviting me on.
Chris, I think we could have like a whole nother conversation about how to nap well and stuff like that, because that's like sleep and napping is like one of my interest areas. But for now, where can people connect with you or find your work?
Yeah, so they can check me out on my website that I mentioned earlier. That's learnwith.cc, and I'm also on X, formerly known as Twitter, as learnwithcc. Those are the two platforms that I'm most active on. I'm also on LinkedIn, but I don't post as much there. So, but if you're a LinkedIn user, come and find me.
Awesome. Do you have any final words or asks for the audience?
I'm planning on starting to host some webinars, free webinars coming up in the next few weeks. And I would love it if listeners would come and check out the website, drop in an email, and just get notified when those happen, because I would love to see some people show up for that. And hopefully I have some little, little nuggets of information that might be worth sharing. Yeah, I would just love to see some people come and hang out. So
thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Focus and Chill podcast. To listen to other episodes, jump onto podcast.focusbear.io. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, or you know someone who'd be a good fit, email us at team@focusbear.io. Otherwise, stay focused, stay chilled, and peace out.